The Diary of Samuel Pepys, 17th of January 1660. Early, I went to Mr. Crewe's, and having given Mr. Edward money to give the servants, I took him into the coach that waited for us and carried him to my house, where the coach waited for me while I and the child went to Westminster Hall and bought him some pictures. In the hall I met Mr. Woodfine and took him to Will's and drank with him. Thence the child and I to the coach, where my wife was ready, and so we went towards Twickenham. In our way at Kensington, we understood how that my Lord Chesterfield had killed another gentleman about half an hour before, and was fled. We went forward and came about 1 o'clock to Mr. Fuller's, but he was out of town, so we had dinner there, and I gave the child 40 shillings to give to the 2 ushers. After that we parted and went homewards, it being market day at Brainford. I set my wife down and went with the coach to Mr. Crewe's, thinking to have spoke with Mr. Moore and Mrs. Jane. He, having told me the reason of his melancholy was some unkindness from her, after so great expressions of love, and how he had spoke to her friends, and had their consents, and that he would desire me to take an occasion of speaking with her, but by no means not to heighten her discontent or distaste, whatever it be, but to make it up if I can. But he being out of doors, I went away and went to see Mrs. Jem, who was now very well again, and after a game or two at cards I left her. So I went to the coffee club and heard very good discourse. It was in answer to Mr. Harrington's answer, who said that the state of the Roman government was not a settled government, and so it was no wonder that the balance of propriety was in one hand and the command in another, it being therefore always in a posture of war. But it was carried by ballot that it was a steady government, though, it is true, by the voices it had been carried before that it was an unsteady government. So tomorrow it is to be proved by the opponents that the balance lie in one hand and the government in another. Thence I went to Westminster and met Shaw and Washington, who told me how this day Sydenham was voted out of the House for setting any more this Parliament, and that Salloway was voted out likewise and sent to the Tower during the pleasure of the House. Home and wrote by post and carried it to Whitehall, and coming back turned in at Harper's, where Jack Price was, and I drank with him, and he told me, among other things, how much the Protector is altered, though he would seem to bear out his trouble very well. Yet he is scarce able to talk sense with a man, and how he will say that, who should a man trust if he may not trust a brother and an uncle? And how much those men have to answer for before God Almighty for their playing each the knaves with him as they did. He told me that there was £100,000 offered, and would have been taken for his restitution had not the Parliament come in as they did again, and that he doth believe that the Protector will live to give a testimony of his valour and revenge yet before he dies, and that the Protector will say so himself sometimes. Thence I went home, it being late, and my wife in bed. Appendix for the 17th. The child who is with Pepys in the beginning is Edward Montague, his lord's son. The duellists who he speaks about were the Earl of Chesterfield, who had been already involved in 2 other duels, and Francis Woley, son of a Hammersmith doctor. They had quarrelled about the price of a mare. Chesterfield took a boat at Chelsea and later fled to Holland, where he obtained the king's pardon. The Protector, who Sam speaks of, is Richard Cromwell, who had been out of power since 1659. The brother, or the brother-in-law that the Protector is talking about, was Fleetwood, and his uncle Desborough. Both were leaders of the movement which had led to Richard Cromwell's fall.